Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Muhammad Marandi. Professor Marandi teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always an honor.
There have been some important developments related to Palestine, but if we could start with the ground situation in Gaza in particular, we are seeing fresh reports about this renewed invasion of Gaza City. Israeli officials have themselves admitted that they have displaced more than 40% at least of Gaza City residents to Al Mawasi, which they are in turn bombing. If you could tell us about the horrors that we are seeing now amidst this long-term genocide that has been unfolding for over 2 years now.
One thing that I think we should take into account and take note of, which is very important, is that for the first few months, Western media hid the reality and tried to speak and tried to repeat the lies about beheadings and rapes in order to justify the genocide. And then after a while, uh, the issue became clear that they were massacring Palestinians. But again, the West tried to pretend that this was not a genocide. They tried to create this debate or tried to argue that this wasn't a genocide and that the Israelis were simply waging war and these were unfortunate victims. But then it just went on and on until we've really saw a turning point in the West where starving babies and starving people, their images were online for us to see. And that created a shift in public opinion, a significant shift. There was always a shift. During the last 2 years, we've seen a shift where people have become supportive of the Palestinian cause. People look at the Israeli regime with disgust. They see it as a genocidal and apartheid regime. But in the West, this shift was more delayed, especially in the United States. And now we see that there's literally a consensus. You see UN bodies now even openly stating that this is a genocide. Remember, during the first few months, when the South Africans put their complaint to the ICJ, the ICJ back then was saying that this could possibly be a genocide. That was well over a year and a half ago. And even though it was clear that the ICJ and later on the ICC were under a great deal of pressure, it's clear that people across the world saw this as a genocide, and increasingly as time progressed. But the point that I'm trying to make is that today, where everyone sees this as a genocide and that it is an extermination of the Palestinian people. And we've seen everything. We've seen babies in incubators being murdered when they pull out the plug in hospitals. The first hospital that was bombed, Western media and Western intelligence agencies even tried to lie and blame the Palestinians. But then when they bombed hospital after hospital after hospital, it became clear that this was not something that the Western media could pretend was not happening anymore. But so we've reached this point today where the UN, where everyone is basically, anyone who is sane, is saying that this is a genocide. Yet, we see the US Secretary of State go to Palestine and speak with the Israeli regime leaders as a close friend and someone who is providing full support. So I think it is very fair to say that the regime in Washington is a genocidal regime. It is as evil as the Israeli regime. It is fully on board with the genocide, and it is contributing as much as it possible to the genocide. And this, I think, has its own significance. It has significance across the world. It is helping with it, it is helping create a consensus across the global South against not just the Israeli regime, but against the United States and the West. One reason for the rise of BRICS, but more recently the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is the behavior of the United States. It is the brutality of Western regimes when it comes to Palestine. There are other issues as well, their behavior towards China, the proxy war in Ukraine, and the bullying that we see directed towards India and Brazil, among others. And of course, there's the more recent episode of Qatar, where a U.S. ally and true proxy, Qatar is no friend of the Palestinian people. Qatar does as it's told. Al Jazeera is allowed to function. There are good people in Al Jazeera and all the many different media outlets that Qatar funds. And there are many religious and cultural institutions that they have across the board. I'm not saying that they're all bad people by any means, but the policy behind them is not is not um, in conflict or in contrast to American policy. What they do is with American consent. And we saw this being admitted that the reason why Hamas is in Qatar is because the Americans wanted them. The reason why the Qatari government hosts them is because the Israeli regime wanted them there. Yet, despite all that, and despite during the recent trip of Trump, we saw how the Qatari regime and the Saudis and the Emiratis treated him as their king, despite all the gifts and all the promises to give all their money to the Americans to rebuild the United States, whether they have that money or not, that's another thing altogether. So despite the promises for investment by these countries, the Qataris, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the gift, the airplane gift to Trump, we saw that he allowed the Israelis to bomb the country. And then later on, when he said it will not happen again, the Netanyahu immediately responded and said it will happen again whenever we deem it necessary. And that basically puts the entire region and the world uh, in a position where they feel that the United States is completely unreliable at any level on any topic. And it makes them the equivalent to the Israeli regime and even subordinate to the Israeli regime and makes Trump look subordinate to Netanyahu. So the Arab League meeting and the meeting of the heads of state of Islamic countries in itself, I don't think it created a huge sea change. Turkey will continue cooperating with Netanyahu, sending oil from Azerbaijan. The Jordanian border will remain open. Goods will go from the Emirates to Saudi to Jordan to the Israeli regime instead of the Red Sea. And Egypt will conduct business as usual. But this contributes to this overarching move away from the West across the world. And then when you look at the events inside the United States, like Charlie Kirk's murder, and regardless of who did it and who is behind it, but the questions that it raises, and then the issues that have come out with regards to his relationship with the Zionists and Zionist billionaires who fund his organization. When you put all of this together, I think it weakens the Western position. So it's not as if there's some sudden shift and sudden change. There's been this gradual change that's been happening over 2 years. But I think if we compare today with 2 years ago, we are living in a much more dangerous world, but a very different world where the collective West has lost a great deal in every respect possible.
I guess that's a very important point that on one hand, we are not seeing dramatic shifts, which from where we can hope that the genocide will just stop tomorrow. On the other hand, if we are seeing this long term, the 2 years, there has definitely been massive change in terms of which narratives have become dominant. Even countries like France moving the recent September 12 UN Resolution, General Assembly resolution in favor of two states. And I want to add that even though it is called two states, it's not just about two states. It's after all about Palestinian sovereignty. It has uh, condemned the Israeli settler violence, expansion in the E1 area, etc., etc. There is a whole range of things. Countries like India has strongly stood behind the general consensus of 142 nations. On the other hand, what we are seeing is a doubling down on part of the US administration. You mentioned about Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State's visit to Israel as he scrambles to save his ties both with Qatar and Israel. But he also notably went to a archaeological site occupied by settlers. And he has inaugurated that, and Palestinian rights groups, activists are calling this as a new chapter because this will legitimize these territories which have been occupied very recently and have forced people out of their homes. Talk about the desperation in the US administration, where we have not seen any veneer anymore. I mean, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now saying that we are not even hopeful of any negotiation in Hamas anymore. And this is a dramatic shift in a way because until a week ago, when Israel didn't bomb Qatar, the US administration was probably lying to all of us, but at least they were lying to all of us, saying that we are seeing a negotiation very soon, at least given the restlessness within Israel, particularly among the families of hostages. Talk about this brazenness in the US administration at a time when the rest of the world seems to have slowly, at least gradually, accepted the reality on ground.
Well, just the very fact that this is Qatar and it is completely subordinate to the United States and it provides so much wealth for American leaders. During the World Cup, it is said that Qatar spent countless billions of dollars, and the the companies that were developing the stadiums and the hotels and the metros, they were all linked to key figures in the United States and some in Europe. So the milking of Qatar takes place at multiple levels. But despite this obedience and despite the fact that the wealth produced from gas in Qatar literally goes to the West and is also invested in the West, that which remains Qatari, but we saw how the United States is unwilling to protect it. The Qataris, they fund the Al Udeid Air Base. They not only gave the land, but they are funding it. They are covering the expenses. Yet the Americans, when the Israelis want to bomb it, they stand down, they cooperate with them, they let them do it. And then when the Americans say it's not going to happen again, the Israelis say, yes, whenever necessary, it will happen again. What does that say about the United States? It makes them completely unreliable. No one trusts them anymore. And then it strengthens the argument of Hezbollah as well. When the Americans conspire with the Saudis and the Turks and their proxies in Syria and the Israeli regime to disarm the resistance in Lebanon, now Hezbollah says in response that, look, the American proxy in Qatar, which is utterly obedient, they get bombed. What deal can we do? What deal can Lebanon do which would protect Lebanon? It's impossible. The Israelis will in future take more territory. They will bomb Lebanon, and the Americans will do absolutely nothing about it, just as we see with regards to the ceasefire and how the so-called Western ceasefire guarantors allow the Israelis to kill Lebanese citizens every single day. Just yesterday, they murdered someone in one strike, and in another, they bombed an apartment building, injuring children and women and families. But the so-called guarantors do nothing. They're indifferent. And when we look at Qatar, it just proves Hezbollah's point. And it also reminds the international community about what happened to Iran. The Americans were negotiating with Iran, constantly shifting the goalposts, and then quietly conspiring with the Israeli regime to carry out a war against Iran. So when all of these are put side by side, Qatar, Iran, Lebanon, Gaza, remember that the ceasefire agreement that was put in place was on the eve of Trump's presidency when he was going to go into the White House. And then a couple of weeks later, they tore up the deal and restarted the Holocaust. That damages the United States in a way in which we cannot calculate in numbers. And in the case of India, as you rightly pointed out, India, which has a different sort of relationship with the Israeli regime, but it condemned it at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. And it also voted against it in the General Assembly. And by the way, the votes would actually have been higher, but countries like Iran did not vote. They went out because Iran does not accept the two-state solution. So it's more the number of countries that back the Palestinians, despite the immense pressure and the bullying by the United States at the UN General Assembly, is extraordinary. And those who voted against it are these tiny Pacific ocean islands that really are insignificant. So this is, as you rightly pointed out, and as we were discussing earlier, this is a part of a process. During the last 2 years, many things have changed. And we know that the United States is not serious about the so-called hostages, even though, as Charlie Kirk himself pointed out, everyone in Israel, before he died, everyone in Israel is a soldier. So it's really difficult for me to accept the notion that these are hostages. These are IDF soldiers or reservists. The hostages are the Palestinians. But that aside, it shows that neither the United States nor the Israelis are serious about a ceasefire, or nor are they serious about the so-called Israeli hostages. It's not just Netanyahu. It is the United States and the Israeli regime. And Netanyahu is very mainstream in Israel. He is no different from, he's not unique. The problem is not Netanyahu. And now that it's clear that the problem is not Israel, the problem is Zionism, and the United States is just as much a problem as the Israeli regime.
And Navi Pillay, the chair of the UN Independent Inquiry Commission on the occupied West Bank, has accused the Israeli state, not just Netanyahu, unlike the ICC report, that it has committed genocide. That's a big change we have seen in the last 2 years, starting from where they started off, talking about narratives about beheading of babies and so on. Professor Marandi, if you could finally talk about the implication of all this on the Arab politics itself. As you said, the Arab states would condemn, Turkey would condemn, but maybe their actions would not change as much. And we've seen this over the 2 years. But that said, a difference that I've been observing is the very rhetoric, the very nature of their statements itself. On the summit, the Arab GCC and OIC summit yesterday, if you read all the statements coming out from Jordan, from Egypt, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, and place them on side by side with the statements of Iran, they seem indistinguishable. Many, including columnists, Al Jazeera columnists, and I know you're critical of Al Jazeera, but there are people who are respectable inside that. One of them is Marwan Bishara, who's been covering this for a long time, and he says that it's been a reflection of the mood on the Arab streets about Palestine. So the gap between the mood within administration and popular and public in general is not just in the United States, but we are seeing that in the Arab world itself. As some of the Arab states would rethink about their dependency on the United States, how do you think would it impact the whole region and its relationship with Iran even?
Well, my critique of Al Jazeera, of course, as I said earlier on, does not mean I believe everyone who works for the different media outlets of Qatar that they are uh, not that they're not good people. They're many good people. But of course, Al Jazeera assisted the Israeli regime a great deal in undermining Syria. This was a part of the Israeli project. It was a part of the American project. It was a part of uh, the Greater Israel project. We're seeing today the reason why they could bomb Qatar today is because of what happened to Syria. And the reason why they flew over Saudi airspace was because of what happened to Syria. And Al Jazeera has not been supportive of the resistance. They were when the Saudis carried out the genocidal war on Yemen. Al Jazeera was supportive of it, and so were the Turks, and it was on the Turkish government. And that only stopped when the siege against Qatar began by the Saudis and the Emiratis and this coalition across the region. So so this created huge harm to the resistance and the Palestinian resistance. But you're absolutely correct. And it's not just during the summit that we just saw, but it was also in the UN Security Council. Algeria and Pakistan, both the representatives of both countries made very harsh speeches against this Israeli regime that are new. That this sort of language, I believe, has not been used before by these countries. And I think that's very important. It does not, Turkey continues to cooperate, so do the others, as I said before, but it shows it is symptomatic of the changes taking place, as you pointed out, on the streets. These governments, in order to remain relevant, in order to be seen as somehow legitimate, they have to, at least to a degree, shift their policy. And that is important. It is not nearly as important as it would be if they just broken ties, which they should have done. They should have all broken ties, political ties, economic ties, military ties. Believe a surprise, whether it's believe it or not, they do. Some of them have military cooperation with the Israeli regime still, but but I think that in any case, even these changes, they when you combine them with what has been, as we've been saying earlier, with the general trend of the last 2 years, they're contributing to a irreversible, I believe, irreversible isolation of the Israeli regime and its collaborators and its enablers and its apologists, whether in Washington, Paris, London, or Berlin, or anywhere else. Uh, they are becoming increasingly marginalized. And that what is, I think, interesting is that what they're doing in Gaza delegitimizes their argument in Ukraine. It delegitimizes their their economic war or their tariff war against China in the eyes of the global public because people see the West as sinister. And so when the West takes a position against Brazil, as we just saw the Secretary of State take, no one has sympathy for him because he's seen as a genocidal monster who's allied to Netanyahu. So whatever position the U.S. takes against Brazil, sympathy automatically goes to Israel, to Brazil. Sympathy when it's China, the world sympathizes with China, and this is something that I've witnessed with Iran. The United States has successfully, through its powerful uh, media, has been able to marginalize, and through the media of its proxies in the region, Arabic countries and others, it has been able to demonize Iran, marginalize Iran. But today you see that across the region and beyond, despite decades of antagonism directed towards it, Iran is becoming increasingly popular. And people are saying that Iran is the only hope. So what the United States is doing, what the West is doing, is destroying its own capabilities in its confrontations on all the different fronts. And at home, it is intensifying the threat of instability. Because regardless of what happened to Charlie Kirk and who killed him, the tensions that are building up inside the United States are very much linked to Zionism and the role that Zionism plays in the United States?
I have personally noticed that in India, I mean, India's voting in the recent resolution for Palestinian statehood is not very surprising in the long run, given India has been voting for Palestinian statehood for a very long time, until very recently when it started abstaining on the dictation of the United States and Israel. But recently, it has not just reversed that, given what has happened, what has been done to India by the United States, and India's coming closer within the BRICS camp. But something to note is that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi immediately sent a very strong tweet in condemnation of Israeli bombing in Qatar, and I think that is different from even the UN resolution, because India has been for some time at least has been tactically refraining from condemning Israel directly. So, on one hand, it does vote in the UN resolution for Palestinian statehood. On the other hand, it would not condemn Israel given its reliance on. Not very, not not huge in terms of volumes, but strategic reliance on some military equipments. But this time, India sent a strong tweet condemning categorical condemnation about on the violation of Qatari sovereignty, and I think we would be seeing more and more global changes in along these directions as the United States fails to resolve the contradictions within it.
Yes, especially since now people across the world are seeing the entire West Asia, which is mostly in the American camp, except for Yemen and Iran and resistance organizations, all of it being threatened, and that the future energy security of the world is becoming threatened, and that even American allies no longer have safety, and that is a threat to India. So the Israeli regime is being seen across the world as out of control, yet American officials who travel to Palestine seem to be completely indifferent and completely happy with what is going on, and that intensifies their isolation. And of course, uh, what the Indian government is now doing enhances its own position across the global South.
We'll leave it there, Professor Marandi. As always, that was a very helpful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Take care. Bye.
You too.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.